This is the Newsload.
Hi, Chuck. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Where are you right now?
On my front porch.
Front porch.
Yeah.
In Toronto?
Yep. Yeah.
Very cool. So, what are you working on these days?
Well, I'm always kind of got a baseline of stand-up going on. That's always been my baseline. And my other big project right now would probably be the comedy merch table, comedymerchtable.com. I'm producing hats and stuff like that. And then I'm also wholesaling hats for comics to sell at their shows. So I just kind of saw a need and I figured I'd fill it.
Yeah, help them out. That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
Exactly. Well, the problem is for a lot of comics, you know, you want to get a good deal on hats, you got to order 1,000 of them. And during the pandemic, when I had nothing to do, it gave me a lot of time to kind of sit down and think, which was, I guess, kind of a benefit if you're looking for one when you're unemployed. And so that's what I did. I just started dumping creativity into that and taught myself Photoshop and Adobe this and Adobe that, and just started doing stuff.
Good for you. Adapting, adjusting, and surviving.
Yeah, like a roach.
So you have a sketch show that you've written?
Oh, Sketchy TV. Yeah, we did that last year. We actually did 42 episodes of it. A little Sketchy TV. It was a lot of fun. We did it for NTD television. We were the only English show on a primarily Chinese language network, other than the English language news. It was us and the English language news. Everything else is a lot of Chinese soap operas. We were sharing the space with. It was a lot of fun. I don't know if we're doing any more. It's the nature of television where you do it, they liked it, and maybe you'll do more, and maybe you won't, and you just kind of wait and see and find out and see if something else comes along in the meantime.
What inspires you to write sketches like that?
Well, I mean, on that show, we were doing a lot of stuff that was current events based, right? So most of the stuff, some of it was just set jokes about the news. So it was like we had a segment called Over to You, which was basically you'd say the headline and then you'd add a punchline. Like, it was very simple stuff. I did little kind of editorial pieces about what was ever in the news or just whatever, something stupid. I was working with Jean Paul and Rob Pugh and Shannon Laverty on screen, and Ian Sirota and George Westerholm and David Murray were our behind the camera crew, writing and directing, and a lot of experience there, a lot of good writing. So, you know, it was considering the number of episodes, 42, which was quite a few, and we were doing about 25 minutes a week. You know, it was a huge volume of material, but you know, everybody in that room's been around comedy in some way or another for, I don't think anybody less than 20 years. So it was just, and we had all been sitting on our asses for a year and a half during the pandemic. So we were ready to go. It was, we were all pent up. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, we mainly worked off of current events and just what was happening in the news. So every week there's something else going on, and we just kept on writing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I guess I'll start right at the beginning. Where were you born?
Vancouver. I was born in Vancouver, grew up in Vancouver, spent a little time in Eastern Canada, like here, going to school, high school and university. And then I went back to Vancouver. That's where I started doing comedy. And I only did comedy in Vancouver for a couple of years. And then I moved to Toronto, and that's where I've been ever since. You know, Vancouver's always going to be the hometown, but I've lived, I think, probably more of my life in Toronto now than I ever did in Vancouver. That's weird to think about.
Did you did you grow up with brothers, sisters?
I had an older brother, and I have a half sister and two stepsisters, and a complicated past.
Yeah, yeah. Your parents were friendly.
No.
with other people?
Well, I guess so. I don't know. I don't want to. I got no interest in doing my family biography. I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
yeah,
Well, it's always curious to know, like where your humor comes from. If you had a funny family.
pain, which is why I don't want to discuss my family biography. Everybody's humor comes from pain. It's about deflection and filling the awkward moment, right? That's what it's about. That's the base of everything, false front.
Self-defense mechanisms.
Yes, that's probably where it started. I mean, like I was always a rabid fan of comedy as a kid. It never crossed my mind to be a comedian. I used to listen to comedy albums. I go back that far. And although they still have comedy albums, I have a comedy album. It's called Pounding Fatties. I'll get that plug in. Don't Google it. Well, you can Google it, but, fair warning, right? Safe search and whatnot. But I was always just a fan. And a friend of mine took me to a live comedy show. The first live comedy show I ever went to, a friend of mine took me in Vancouver. And on the way out the door, he was like, it was at a time where I didn't know what I was going to do in my life, early 20s. And he said, that's what you should be doing. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, you already do it. You know more about stand-up comedy than anyone I've ever met. You should do that. You already are doing it with everybody you encounter and everywhere you go. Go be funny for money. And so I started doing it, and I haven't had a real job since.
What an incredibly supportive friend. That's very, very cool.
He might have just been trying to get rid of me, had me out on the road, because that's where you go next, right? If you're going to be a comedian, generally speaking, I'm a rare entity. I spend a lot of time at home. I work mainly locally. I don't tour that much because I got kids. So I like to stay close to home.
Yeah, I saw a picture of you and your son when he was younger, and he's a carbon copy of you. He looks exactly like
both,
he was so cute.
Yeah, there was no denying it. That was,
It's yours.
Yeah. They're my kids. I get two of them. They both look. Actually, they both look like their mom, and they both look like me. It depends on who they're standing next to. Is people just say, "Well, your kids really look like you."
Yeah. I love, the picture of you cheek to cheek, and you just look so happy, and he's a beautiful boy. Do they think you're funny?
Yeah, I mean, but I'm also a pain in the ass, right? Because I use humor as a tool, just like we all do. But I'm probably just a little bit better skilled at it. I'm certainly better skilled at it than they are, right? And when you spend north of a couple of decades talking for a living, arguing with your kids can be very entertaining because, it's they have about the same skill set as somebody at last call, right? They're not really all that coordinated. They don't have access to all of their vocabulary. And, if you want to, you can just kind of sit there and ping them with words.
Like your son doesn't want to have a bath, and it's like, okay, you're going to be a stinky bum kind of thing.
Well, no, I mean, stuff like that. I mean, I'm past that stuff now. My kids are teenagers, so now it's just, stop stealing my weed, and although my son's 15, so yeah, he does stink. All 15-year-olds stink. That's why they sell the Max body spray, right? It's a slightly less inoffensive alternative to BO, right?
Yeah,
Ugh.
it's apparently a common thing where teenagers just stink now. They don't know about showers or deodorant or.
Well, they probably just found out that the rest of us, in the 90s, were hosing ourselves down with poisonous chemicals so that people wouldn't smell our BO when we could have just bought a bar of Irish soap.
Yeah.
Right? Kids are stupid. That's their game. No better time to be stupid than when you're 15.
So you have been in comedy for several decades. Do you have a favorite heckling story?
I don't know if I have any one particular heckling story. I mean, heckling now is what I like about comedy is that heckling does exist. I still work in venues where you'll get heckling. There's some venues where you don't. Like when you play the Halifax Comedy Festival and they're recording it for TV, you're not going to get a heckler. You're certainly not going to get a heckler that isn't on your side, right? And a lot of heckling is people that are on your side. They're just people that are yelling out their agreement with what you said. So you got to be careful when you jump at somebody. If you jump at somebody, that you're not jumping at somebody that just patted you on the back. But I've had a couple of instances where somebody really laid an egg for me. One of them was one of my first ever television appearances was on the Mike Bullard show, open mic with Mike Bullard. And they were, at the time, they recorded it down in the back room of Wayne Gretzky's restaurant. And somehow I got on this show, and I was not scheduled to be on the show. I wasn't supposed to be there. Somebody had canceled, something like that. And so I ended up on this show. And so I run home, and I have no clothes for television. I've been doing comedy like 2.5 years or something, maybe at this point. 3 years, I don't know. It wasn't a very long time, right? I'd done comedy at Club 54 down in Burlington, and that was it. And this was somebody just handed me this, and I was like, okay. So I go home, I put on this sweater, which to this day is a bit of a regret. It was a terribly ugly sweater. And I go, and I'm going to do 5 minutes, and or maybe it was less. I don't know, 3.5 minutes. It wasn't a long set. And I mentioned something about Quebec. I get up there, I mentioned something about Quebec, and somebody in the audience just flatly yells out, "I'm French," in the middle of my joke. And just kind of, it was just like a stick in the spokes. It just kind of stopped everything that was going on. And I just stopped, and I just said, see, this is why people hate the French, right? I'm getting heckled on national television. My grandmother's probably going to be watching this, and you're interrupting. And then I just had to move on. But it was like one of those things. That was one of those moments where where the heckler got the best of me, because they just interrupted at a moment that I couldn't stop and address it, right? I don't have time to stop and address it, nor do I have, they're not going to stop the filming of the show to redo it. I know how television works. Nobody's interested in that. They just want to get it on tape and move on. So, yeah, that was a terrible heckle moment. But I've also had heckler moments where I was in Nova Scotia once, and I had a guy yell out full volume at the right moment when the crowd was quiet. He yelled out, "I fucked your mom." And I immediately replied with, "Well, you owe me $5. And then the room exploded.
That's a good
and because a lot of the time, none of it is personal. That's what you have to learn as a comedian. Very rarely, certainly as an unknown comedian, it's not personal. It's their issue that they're dealing with, that they're yelling about, right? Whether they like you, hate you, whatever, it's on them. It has nothing to do with you. You're just some guy talking, making jokes at the front of the room. And so when you understand that, it's just you're playing tennis in a conversation against another anonymous person. You may as well just be signed up at the tournament, and that's who you got assigned to. And so when somebody yells at you, you can't take it personally. And so I've always found that the best reaction is just to bounce it right back. All right, it's your serve, right? And you spend enough, there's not a lot of professional baseball players that have been playing baseball for 25 years that wonder what's going to happen when they get up to the plate. They'll deal with whatever pitch is thrown at them, and they'll do their job. And that's what it's like if you watch comics that have been around for a while, they're more relaxed just because they're not going to be surprised by anything. Unless they're playing rooms that they're unfamiliar with. But I've been very lucky in that I've played Massey Hall. I've played the National Arts Center in Ottawa. And I've played the Legion, and I've played the top deck of an open party boat, and a small cafe with 15 people in it. And once you've done all of those rooms, they're all just kind of, you realize that You just make the little adjustments that you got to make. The best thing about stand-up comedy is everybody in the room knows what's happening. Everybody in the room knows if the show's going well or if the show isn't going well, if it's a good time or if it's not a good time. There's no mystery to that, which is a wonderful tool, right? Because you can comment on the moment. That's the best thing about the live show, is that it's about the moment.
Do you prefer live performing or the sketch writing before a show?
I like it all. They're all just, what's your favorite kind of ice cream? I like ice cream, right? That's all. That's all that's important, right?
What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
There's a lot less driving involved in sitting on my front porch writing a sketch show, right? Mm-hmm. And doing Zoom meetings with the other writers and just having a good time laughing. Mm-hmm. That was, a wonderful experience. And I'd certainly like to do more of it. You don't have to drive 4 hours through a blizzard to get to the show, and not knowing if it's going to necessarily be a good night or not. In terms of, I'm always going to have a good night. I'm ready to go, but I don't know if the audience is. Like, sometimes you walk into a room full of people that are drunk and they don't necessarily want to listen to you, or sometimes you walk into a corporate and nobody's comfortable with the idea of laughing at anything at work, because that's not the kind of workplace it is. There's all sorts of things that can work against you in comedy and work for you in comedy. There's less mystery on the TV on what you're doing. You're just going to crank out some sketches. You're going to hope you get them off. Hope the shooting of it goes smoothly, and you get out of there early and on to the next week.
Do you have a comic that inspires you?
Currently, I've had a lot of comics a ton of comics that I admire, and I from the absolute bottom of show business to the absolute top. As a kid, I loved Bob Newhart, and the reason why I love Bob Newhart was because, can you think of an more unlikely person to have 2 10-year top 10 American television sitcoms than Bob Newhart? Like, a more unlikely television star. And as a result, it's completely based upon how Bob Newhart makes you feel when he talks, right? He relaxes you and makes you laugh, right? He's not going to push anybody's buttons. He's just a guy getting through his day. In both of those shows he was. And he had a remarkable career. Still is having a remarkable career, which is another unbelievable thing. So Bob Newhart's one of those guys that got me in early. Like, in terms of stand-up, there's always the people that, when I was young, I was impressed by Lenny Bruce because of the context of Lenny Bruce. George Carlin was more impressive because he made people think about things that you don't necessarily think about unless you're sitting around with a group of comics smoking pot all afternoon. He was able to express that in a way that brought people in. And then I got into John Candy movies because I was fat, and John Candy was brilliant with the small moments, right? And being able to make you feel something, right? With a look in the eye or a pause in a moment or whatever. Steve Martin showed me that, you do whatever the hell you want to do. Eddie Murphy opened me up to a whole world of foul language. Even Andrew Dice Clay, as a teenage boy, Andrew Dice Clay was like, it was rock and roll. Everything that music was doing on the rock and roll heavy metal side, like the Ozzy Osbourne and all that kind of stuff, everything that they were doing, he was like a Motley Crue for stand-up comics.
Absolutely.
Right? He was that other vein, right? And people will say, oh, it's all bro comedy and stuff like that. And Joe Rogan's a lot like that now. But he brings an audience to comedy that wouldn't necessarily be there without him.
Absolutely.
In the same way, Russell Peters. When Russell Peters was first starting out, Russell Peters brought a lot of people to live stand-up comedy shows that had never been to one before, because they were supporting Russell, because he was part of their community. Like a lot of Indian people were brought into comedy because of Russell, and I mean in Canada.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Chuck, I think that you're absolutely phenomenal. And you're pushing your merchandise right now.
Oh yeah, comedymerchtable.com. I mean, I'd plug a specific comedy date. You know, I've got plenty of comedy dates, but this is going to live on the internet, right? So the idea of plugging something seems like, you know, I'll be at the Chuckle Hut in September of 1987, right? When you're watching this, it doesn't make as much sense to me.
No,
So
no.
I'll
But
somewhere.
yeah,
I'll
you're
be somewhere. My handle's Chuck B Jokes on Twitter and Instagram, so you can look me up there. You can follow me there. That'd be very helpful.
Okay.
I got like 12 followers. Me and Jesus, we're good.
12 is good.
They all fish.
Well, Chuck, I hope you have the most beautiful day. Thank you so much for your time. And if you can just
Thanks
do
for having
one last thing for me, if you can say it loud, if you can say it proud, I love Newsload.
I love Newsload. I love Newsload. I love Newsload. There's 3 takes, right? You get 3 takes. Other than that, I got to start charging you money after 3 takes. That's my policy.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I hope you have an amazing day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is the Newsload.